detectors were going wild, it would have been a different story, they later told me. But with the data I had for them, this was the only answer they could give. No one could explain the sudden bursts of radiation, but there was no proof that they were associated with UFOs. The board's ruling wrote finish to this investigation. I informed the colonel, and he didn't like the decision. Later, I passed through the city where the scientist was working. I stopped over a few hours to brief him on the board's decision. He shook his head in disbelief. It is interesting to note that both the colonel and the scientist reacted in the same way. We're not fools. We were there. We saw it. They didn't. What do they want for proof? End of chapter 15. Recording by Roger Moline. Chapter 16 of The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Roger Moline. The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects by Edward Ruppel. Team. The Hierarchy Ponders. By early January 1953, the scientists who were to be members of our panel of experts had been contacted and had agreed to sit in judgment of the UFO. In turn, we agreed to give them every detail about the UFO. We had our best reports for them to read, and we were going to show them the two movies that some intelligence officers considered as the positive proof, the Tremonton movie and the Montana movie. When this High Court convened on the morning of January 12th, the first thing it received was its orders. One of 3 verdicts would be acceptable. All UFO reports are explainable as known objects or natural phenomena, therefore the investigation should be permanently discontinued. The UFO reports do not contain enough data upon which to base a final conclusion. Project Blue Book should be continued in hopes of obtaining better data. The UFOs are interplanetary spacecraft. The written verdict, the group was told, would be given to the National Security Council, a council made up of the directors of all U.S. intelligence agencies, and thence it would go to the President of the United States, if they should decide that the UFOs were interplanetary spacecraft. Because of military regulations, the names of the panel members, like the names of so many other people associated with the UFO story, cannot be revealed. 2 of the men had made names for themselves as practical physicists. They could transform the highest theory for practical uses. One of these men had developed the radar that pulled us out of a big hole at the beginning of World War II, and the other had been one of the fathers of the H-bomb. Another of the panel members is now the chief civilian advisor to one of our top military commanders, and another was an astronomer whose unpublished fight to get the UFO recognized is respected throughout scientific circles. There was a man who is noted for his highly theoretical physics and mathematics, and another who had pioneered operations research during World War II. The 6th member of the panel had been honored by the American Rocket Society and the International Aeronautical Federation for his work in moving space travel from the Buck Rogers realm to the point of near reality, and who is now a rocket expert. It was an impressive collection of top scientific talent. During the first 2 days of the meeting, I reviewed our findings for the scientists. Since June 1947, when the first UFO report had been made, ATIC had analyzed 1,593 UFO reports. About 4,400 had actually been received, but all except 1,593 had been immediately rejected for analysis. From our studies, we estimated that ATIC received reports of only 10% of the UFO sightings that were made in the United States. Therefore, in 5.5 years, something like 44,000 UFO sightings had been made. Of the 1,593 reports that had been analyzed by Project Blue Book, and we had studied and evaluated every report in the Air Force files, we had been able to explain a great many. The actual breakdown was like this: balloons, 18.51%, known 1.57, probable 4.99, possible 11.95, 18.51. Aircraft, 11.76%, known 0.98, probable 7.74, possible 3.04, 11.76. Astronomical bodies, 14.20%, known 2.79, probable 4.01, possible 7.40, 14.20. Other, 4.21%. Searchlights on clouds, birds, blowing paper, inversions, reflections, etc. Hoaxes, 1.66%. Insufficient data, 22.72%, in addition to those initially eliminated. Unknowns, 26.94%. By using the terms known, probable, and possible, we were able to differentiate how positive we were of our conclusions. But even in the possible cases, we were, in our own minds, sure that we had identified the reported UFO. And who made these reports? Pilots and air crews made 17.1% from the air. Scientists and engineers made 5.7%. Airport control tower operators made an even 1.0% of the reports. And 12.5% of the total were radar reports. The remaining 63.7% were made by military and civilian observers in general. The reports that we were interested in were the 26.94%, or 429 unknowns, so we had studied them in great detail. We studied the reported colors of the UFOs, the shapes, the directions they were traveling, the times of day they were observed, and many more details, but we could find no significant pattern or trend. The most often reported shape was elliptical, and that the most often reported color was white or metallic. About the same number of UFOs were reported as being seen in daytime as at night, and the direction of travel equally covered the 16 cardinal headings of the compass. 70% of the unknowns had been seen visually from the air. 12% had been seen visually from the ground. 10% had been picked up by ground or airborne radar, and 8% were combination visual radar sightings. In the overall total of 1,593 sightings, women made 2 reports for every one made by a man, but in the unknowns, the men beat out women 10-1. There were 2 other factors we could never resolve: the frequency of the sightings and their geographical distribution. Since the first flurry of reports in July of 1947, each July brought a definite peak in reports. Then a definite secondary peak occurred just before each Christmas. We plotted these peaks in sightings against high tides, worldwide atomic tests, the positions of the moon and planets, the general cloudiness over the United States, and a dozen and one other things. But we could never say what caused more people to see UFOs at certain times of the year. Then the UFOs were habitually reported from areas around technically interesting places, like our atomic energy installations, harbors, and critical manufacturing areas. Our study showed that such vital military areas as Strategic Air Command and Air Defense Command bases, some A-bomb storage areas, and large military depots actually produced fewer reports than could be expected from a given area in the United States. Large population centers devoid of any major technically interesting facilities also produced few reports. According to the laws of normal distribution, if UFOs are not intelligently controlled vehicles, the distribution of reports should have been similar to the distribution of population in the United States. It wasn't. Our study of the geographical locations of sightings also covered other countries. The U.S. by no means had a curve on the UFO market. In all of our unknown reports, we never found one measurement of size, speed, or altitude that could be considered to be even fairly accurate. We could say only that some of the UFOs had been traveling pretty fast. As far as radar was concerned, we had reports of fantastic speeds, up to 50,000 miles an hour. But in all of these instances, there was some doubt as to exactly what caused the target. The highest speeds reported for our combination radar visual sightings, which we considered to be the best type of sighting in our files, were 700 to 800 miles an hour. We had never picked up any hardware, any whole saucers, pieces, or parts that couldn't be readily identified as being something very earthly. We had a contract with a materials testing laboratory, and they would analyze any piece of material that we found or was sent to us. The tar-covered marble, aluminum broom handle, cow manure, slag, pieces of plastic balloon, and the what have you that we did receive and analyze only served to give the people in our material lab some practice and added nothing but laughs to the UFO project. The same went for the reports of contacts with spacemen. Since 1952, a dozen or so people have claimed that they have talked to or ridden with the crews of flying saucers. They offer affidavits, pieces of material, photographs, and other bits and pieces of junk as proof. We investigated some of these reports and could find absolutely no fact behind the stories. We had 100 or so photos of flying saucers, both stills and movies. Many were fakes, some so expert that it took careful study by photo interpreters to show how the photos had been faked. Some were the crudest of fakes, automobile hubcaps thrown into the air, homemade saucers suspended by threads, and just plain retouched negatives. The rest of the still photos had been sent in by well-meaning citizens who couldn't recognize a light flare of flaw in the negative, or who had chanced to get an excellent photo of a sundog or mirage.